Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. Ukraine War News Update, first part thereof for the 19th of March 2024. Let's get straight to where we normally start. The Ukrainian General Staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply, and you can find those caveats in the description to the video below. 840 personnel lost, 10 tanks, 35 armoured personnel vehicles and 30 artillery systems. So, personnel is fairly high number, but about where we've seen it recently, not the highest end of the spectrum. 10 tanks is just about average or so, a little bit above, if I remember correctly. 35 armoured personnel vehicles is a very significant number, double the average, and 30 artillery systems likewise. So some very high numbers in a couple of those categories. You can add one anti-aircraft warfare system and 50 vehicles and fuel tanks to these numbers. So 50 vehicles and fuel tanks is, again, really high in that category. There has been consistent days, weeks really, of vehicles being absolutely hammered by Ukrainian, presumably mainly Ukrainian FPV drones, 4 pieces of special equipment as well. When we look at Andrew Perpetua's loss statistics in surveying the socials for visually confirmed losses, we can see that the ratio is again in favour of the Ukrainians, about a 3-to-1, maybe a little bit more ratio of Russian to Ukrainian losses. So that's fairly good for them. Unfortunately, there is a Strela 10 short-range air defence system of the Ukrainians that's been added to the list today. A Lancet drone. Those Lancets, as you can see from 4, 5 entries there for the Ukrainians, Lancers are still causing a problem. So M777 was damaged by a Lancet, although the camo net helped. That's a howitzer. You've also got another Soviet-era howitzer being damaged by a Lancet, and then a further, possibly an M777 being damaged by a Lancet too. So those Lancers are still proving themselves to be a nuisance for the Ukrainians, and that's an understatement. We have a Bradley that's been destroyed. It's older, but so far unmapped, added to the list. And then a few other bits and pieces. Also an Island-class patrol boat hit by a Lancet and damaged is a bit of a sore point for the Ukrainians. Now, the Russians have lost their own air defense system, but it's actually a Ural with a ZU-23-2, so one of these kind of autocannons on the back of a truck. Not the highest value bit of kit in terms of air defense. 3 surveillance and comms equipment's taken out. And then what do we have? We have a Baba Yaga damaging a TOS-1A thermobaric launcher. So that's going to be a bit of a challenge for the Russians, although it is only damaged and not destroyed. And then we have a number of a few tanks there and some IFVs. Fewer IFVs today than the huge numbers that we have seen recently lost on a daily basis. Some APCs, and then a number of trucks, ATVs and other bits of kit. So a real range of equipment taken out there. A few more bits of artillery today than we see normally. Artillery, we don't see as much visual confirmation. So when we're looking at the Ukrainian General Staff figures, there is a bit of a disparity between the claims of artillery and what we see visually confirmed. And I have a feeling it'll be down to, spotted drones being less prevalent further back. So I think my speculation is you get a lot of spotted drones spotting for these IFVs that hit and the IFVs that take out the footage from the IFVs of your trucks and APCs and tanks IFVs. But I think because the artillery is further back, you probably have fewer spotted drones, although the FPV drones should have footage themselves. So it is certainly a point of interest as to why there is that disparity. Right, moving on though, just in terms of personnel lost, there's lots of footage coming out of FPV drones causing absolute havoc. This is a 47th Mechanized Brigade defeating 2 complete platoons of Russians, showing 21 dead and 16 wounded. So this then, it leads into the claims of the General Staff, where just the numbers of troops are being that are being lost on a daily basis is fairly significant, and a lot of that is going to be coming from FPV drones. And I've seen, and this footage, I obviously can't show it to you, but this footage is a good example of. I mean, it's pretty horrible to watch basically people dying as a result of FPV drones. So, warnings, and remember, these are human beings. But the way these drones are being used, they're often used on individual people. And sometimes these are people that are either already injured or dead, but they're just making sure. And so this tells me a number of things, that they appear to have enough drones in certain areas to be able to hit individuals. So it's like one drone per person. But also if they're injured or possibly already dead, some of these, they look like they're dead anyway, and they're just making sure with another FPV drone hitting them. You're thinking, you've obviously got enough drones to be able to make sure of the targets you've got here. So you're not worried about using FPV drones, particularly in this place. It might not be the same all across the front line, but I get the sense that if they're using them like that, they just have quite a number of them. When we talk about losses, we haven't heard too much recently of any airframes being lost by the Russians, but there is some analysis here. Very interesting story written by a Ukrainian scholar trying to calculate Russian aircraft situation. Long story short, losses are running considerably above production. As such, less good aircraft will have to be used or operations scaled back. The conclusion is below. So the conclusion from a Ukrainian scholar, so let's summarize. Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, and they had approximately 780 tactical aircraft in service, divided between fighter and tactical strike aircraft. Confirmed losses, according to the most conservative estimates, amount to about 90 to 100 aircraft. Obviously, some people saying a lot more than that, with 2/3 of those being tactical strike aircraft. Likely, Russia has lost anywhere from 130 to 150 aircraft. However, this does not take into account the aircraft that have been sent in for repair, or those that have been cannibalized for parts for other aircraft. So you've got to also remember that some of these airframes are at the end of their lifespans, and they are being used consistently on missions, and they will basically start failing, and there will be natural attrition of aircraft that would add. I remember reading to you probably over a year ago now an analysis of the natural attrition rates and how many they would be losing in terms of aircraft given the number of flight hours that they are pumping out with them. However, this does not take into account the aircraft that have been sent in for repair or been cannibalized for spare parts for other aircraft. Russia's current annual production of combat aircraft is 20 to 30 aircraft. Although precise statistics are hard to come by as they're not published. That being said, Russia's aircraft production does not remotely cover its losses. While some of its losses could be covered by returning aircraft at storage bases to service, this is only really feasible for Su-24Ms and Su-25s. So, yeah, they could be struggling to maintain the fleets in and don't forget that will also include pilots. So, yeah, that's just your airframes that are lost. But if you're losing pilots, that's something that you can ill afford to lose. You can't replace pilots as quickly as you can airframes. Like, you can build an airframe within a year, right? You can build 20 to 30 in a year, but you can't take randoms off the streets and turn them into experienced fighter jet pilots within a year. And so there are two elements that need to be discussed in terms of aircraft losses. Russians are trying to evacuate a previously damaged and captured Ukrainian Leopard 2A4. So this is a real shame in the Terny area that the Ukrainians have lost a 2A4 to the Russians. However, in trying to evacuate it or tow it away from the contact line or nearby, they lose one of their own armoured vehicles themselves. So I don't know if they actually successfully got that vehicle out of there, since the one towing it appears to have been blown up. Russian Freedom Legion claims the destruction of an R-330 Zhetel electronic warfare complex in Krasnaya Yaruga in Belgorod. These guys do serious damage, says no reports. This is way more than a one-time raid like the previous time. There are conflicting views about what is being achieved here. I was speaking to Greg this morning. I was like, mate, what's the view like on the ground with regard to what's going on in Belgorod? You know, what do the troops think? And there are areas of Sumy and just across the border, Kharkiv Oblast, Sumy Oblast, that have been absolutely hammered in a kind of retaliation. So we talked about a village the other night that was reduced to rubble. That's had 340 shells, like it's shelled 340 times. Just one village, and it's basically flattened. You've got yesterday 230, I think, guided glide bombs hit Sumy Oblast. It's being absolutely hammered. So, I mean, you could say, well, rather they use those bombs up along the border there than against military targets, maybe on the front line. I guess you could make that argument, but there are some questions as to, yeah, okay, so these Russians are doing what they want to do. Yeah, they are being provided weapons, but they've got their own kind of objectives. But is it overall really helping the Ukrainians? And it seems like not all Ukrainians think that they are. That said, there is still activity going on in the Belgorod region, in Belgorod Oblast. This is Belgorod itself, where you can see a Pantsir missile that I talked about yesterday in the side of the building. And I don't know if this is the same one, but there's possibly another Pantsir remnant causing damage to civilians in Belgorod. Now, the idea is who's actually throwing missiles into the city of Belgorod or shelling Belgorod? Is that really what the pro-Ukrainian Russians are doing, the Free Russians are doing? Is that a waste of ammunition on just randomly attacking civilians? Or are they trying to hit targets that are near Belgorod, but in Belgorod the air defences appear to be within the city confines? And so they fire up and shoot down these missiles or rockets or whatever. And in fact, they claim they are shooting down VM-70 multiple launch rockets, and they fall in Belgorod. And here's evidence that is at least part of the problem. Whether it's completely what's going on, I don't know. But there are air defense rockets that are falling in Belgorod. And then randomly, just add a loss here. This is a Wagner helicopter crash in the Central African Republic. A Gazelle helicopter crashed north of the Central African Republic near the border with Chad last week. According to our sources, 5 mercenaries were on board. 2 of them died and 3 of them were transported to a hospital. The crash site is guided by several Wagner mercenaries. Russian PMC already lost one of their Gazelle helicopters in 2021. Another one of Wagner's helicopters, a Mi-8 or Mi-24, is currently being repaired after being damaged by rebels. Wagner suffered important losses in the Central African Republic recently. The temporary loss of one helicopter and a definitive loss of the Gazelle could affect their combat capabilities in the Central African Republic even further. Now, this is important for Ukraine because these guys are essentially providing cash for the Russian government to prosecute the war in Ukraine. And so if they come a cropper there, then that's good news for the Ukrainians going forward. Okay, on to distance strikes and whatnot. So we have last night the Russians shelled Seladova with 2 S-300 missiles. So they're firing S-300s into Ukraine again. I don't know of the details of any drones or missiles in general. Like normally you have that infographic with a number of drones sent over. I've not heard that, so it could be a quiet night on both sides. And I don't know whether we will see both sides pulling back a little bit from activities given that the election has been and gone. So on the one hand, the Russians were trying to get huge successes before March the 17th, and so therefore were attacking lots with their army and throwing drones into Ukraine aplenty to try and cause as much damage and shout about it. And likewise, the Ukrainians were hitting all sorts of oil refineries consistently, and that seems to have stopped the last 2 nights. So I don't know whether the election has a lot to answer for. The election, it wasn't an election. Anyway, a Russian Shahed was taken out by electronic warfare last night in Vinnytsia region. So that's good news that they can do that. But then that's the only evidence I've so far seen of drone activity. Russian rocket engine manufacturer Energomash in Belgorod was attacked. So the activities taking place in Belgorod appear to be at least having some operational strategic targets, as well as just being a case of causing the Russians a bit of a nuisance and fixing their troops and whatnot. I still don't know what the end game is for the Free Russia troops. And as mentioned, there are arguments for and against what they are doing, but it's good to see sensible targeting there. Sevastopol, there were explosions yesterday evening. I haven't heard any details on that either. So just to say that although I'm not giving you infographics of what's happened in too much detail, there probably were attacks into both countries by both sides. Now, moving on to other bits and pieces, Ilya Yevlash has been appointed a new spokesperson for the Air Force of Ukraine instead of Yuri Ignat. So we've heard from Yuri Ignat for ages now. He's a guy that says everything about the Ukrainian Air Force, wins and losses and whatnot. Yevlash was previously a press officer for the ground forces, and Yuri Ignat has been appointed to another role that he's asked to go to himself, so on his own request. It's not that he's been moved aside. Since the start of 2024, Russia's artillery advantage stands at 7-1, said Ivan Havrilyuk. So we previously thought 2,000 to 10,000. That's a 5-1, so it's probably worse than that. Ukrainian Deputy Defense Minister has said. Additionally, Russian aircraft have dropped over 3,500 air bombs on Ukrainian positions, marking a 16-fold increase from the previous year. Well, if the claim is correct that they dropped 230 of those on Sumy last night, then goodness me, they are very active at the moment. I think the biggest challenge for Ukraine is Russian aviation with those bombs. In terms of what the Russians are doing, in terms of what the Ukrainians need, of course, obviously, ammunition and boots on the ground. For the third day in a row, Belgorod started with explosions this morning, so thick smoke is rising after impact somewhere. There's lots of activity going on in Belgorod and around the oblast in general, with explosions and fires and things. And just, again, I'm not casting too much of an opinion on this because I just don't know. It's a really confused viewpoint as to what's going on in these sort of areas. Belgorod is so close to the Ukrainian border in the same way that Kharkiv is to the Russian border that Belgorod can be hit from within Ukraine. But there's lots of activity taking place. As mentioned, Sumy was hit with a whole load of Russian aerial guided glide bombs. Likewise, where's this place? Velika Pisarivka here was flattened, as Greg said the other day on the live stream. And it's a fairly sizable village, but that was hit with something like 340 shells. It was absolutely hammered. Massive destruction there. Right, Russian media confirmed that the new commander of the Russian Navy has been appointed, Alexander Moiseev. He used to command the Russian Northern Fleet, and now in charge of the whole Navy. The previous commander was removed from his position after the Russian Black Sea Fleet lost almost a third of its combat power since the beginning of the full-scale invasion. Just in the past month, it's lost 2 ships in total. Over 2 years of full-scale war, Russia's lost more than 20 ships, including landing ships, submarines, and a flagship cruiser Moskva. We've also had Shoigu, here he is, visiting the fleet in Crimea. I think arrived in Russia-occupied Sevastopol to inspect the Black Sea Fleet, or what's left of it there. Now, apparently he has demanded that there are heavy machine guns attached to the sides of the ships, and they need to work really hard and train their personnel on taking out the Ukrainian naval drones. I mean, it seems weird that it would take this long for the defense minister, not like the captain of a naval vessel or an admiral, to make those decisions. But there you go. You got to wait till the top man says it before you do it. But yeah, so that's interesting. And of course, the leader of the Black Sea Fleet, head of Black Sea Fleet, the Admiral Sokolov, is still not being heard from, and I think he's been replaced, hasn't he? So there you go. He's not been heard from an awful long time. Almost certainly died in that strike on Crimea, on Sevastopol. What is it, 6 months ago now? Anyway, Stanimir Dobrev here says, I don't think people appreciate how expensive Russian logistics are becoming. 24% interest on a truck lease has made it impossible to replace a mid-sized company's fleet. Chinese and Russian trucks are expensive, and they are less fuel efficient. And this is the entire margin. So he's referring to his own claim here that Russian companies are cancelling truck leases due to the cost of 24% interest in outsourcing transportation. Only companies with very large fleets can continue operating. Also, Chinese trucks are as expensive as EU ones, but of lower quality. And so, really big issues across across Russia in a number of different contexts with regard to the economy and sanctions and whatnot. And this is a massive long thread of all sorts of different economic impacts of the war and different economic claims going on at the moment. So goodness me, lots to talk about there, but I'll move on. And just one thing that probably got nothing to do with the war, but there are 13 miners trapped in a Russian mine at the moment. It's not directly connected to the war, says Tim White, but this will grab a lot of headlines. While mine disasters happen, it could be exacerbated by lack of safety investment and sanctions and so on and so forth. So issues there. Anyway, that's enough from me. I've taken longer to do this because I am due to I'm not due to. I've just recorded a debunking of Russell Brand, of all people, making claims with Bill Maher on Ukraine that was so egregious that we had to do a debunking video. So that's myself and Tom have done that. We did one previously with Candace Owens, so that'll be coming out later today. Anyway, take care. Speak to you soon.